Robert Baratheon was born beneath thunder. At Storm's End, the sea does not simply meet the land, it assaults it. Waves rise like siege towers and shatter themselves against stone walls raised by ancient hands. Wind screams through the battlements and lightning cracks the sky as if the storm itself were alive. It was here, in this harsh stronghold at the edge of the narrow sea, that Robert of House Baratheon first drew breath, heir to a line forged in defiance. House Baratheon was young by the standards of Westeros, but its blood was ancient. Their sigil, the crowned black stag on a field of gold, spoke of strength and dominance, but their origins lay in rebellion. Orys Baratheon, rumoured bastard brother of Aegon the Conqueror, had taken Storm's End from the Durandons during the War of Conquest. By marriage and by blade, he ended a dynasty that had ruled the Stormlands since the Age of Heroes. From the beginning, the Baratheons were defined not by inheritance alone, but by conquest. Robert inherited that legacy in full. He was the firstborn son of Steffon Baratheon, Lord of Storm's End, and Cassana Estamont, a woman of the Green Isles off Cape Wrath. From infancy, Robert was large. As a boy, he grew fast and broad, thick of chest and limb, with a voice that carried easily and a laugh that filled halls. Even then, he was restless. Storm's End could not hold him long. He ran its yards, climbed its towers, and sparred until bruised and bloody, only to rise grinning. His younger brothers, Stannis and Renly, could not have been more different. Stannis was stern, thin, and rigid, where Robert was expansive. Renly, born years later, would grow handsome and charming, but even as a child he lingered in Robert's shadow. From the beginning, Robert dominated any room he entered. People noticed him. Men followed him. He made friends as easily as he made enemies, and he never seemed to care which he earned more of. Yet for all his strength and confidence, Robert's childhood was cut short by the sea. When Robert was still young, his father Steffon was summoned to King's Landing by King Aerys II. The Mad King, growing increasingly unstable, wished to find a suitable bride for his son Rhaegar. Steffon and Cassana were sent across the narrow sea to seek a noblewoman of Valyrian descent. They found one, but never returned. Their ship was wrecked in a storm within sight of Storm's End itself. The sea claimed them both while their castle loomed just beyond reach. It was said that young Robert stood on the battlements as the waves smashed the ship apart, helpless and watching. Whether he truly witnessed it or not, the truth mattered little. His parents were gone. Storm's End passed to him in name but not in practice. Robert was still too young to rule. Jon Arryn, Lord of the Eyrie, became his guardian. Robert was sent to the Vale, to be fostered alongside another ward of Jon Arryn, Eddard Stark of Winterfell. The pairing would shape the fate of the realm more than anyone alive could have guessed. The Vale was colder than the Stormlands, sharper in every way. Its mountains rose sheer and unforgiving, and the Eyrie sat like an eagle's nest above the clouds. Where Storm's End was battered by storms, the Vale was defined by height and isolation. Robert adapted quickly. He trained harder, ate more, laughed louder. He grew into his strength as if the mountains themselves were a challenge issued to him. Ned Stark was quieter. Where Robert charged forward, Ned observed. Where Robert laughed, Ned listened. The two could not have been more different, yet they became inseparable. They trained together, fought together, and learned under Jon Arryn's watchful eye. Jon was a stern but fair man, one who valued duty above pride, honour above ambition. He taught both boys the responsibilities of lordship, though only one truly listened. Robert learned the lessons of battle eagerly. He took to weapons with frightening ease. The warhammer became his favoured tool, not a knight's blade, but a brutal instrument that crushed armour and bone alike. He revelled in its weight, in the sheer physicality of combat. Fighting made sense to him. It was honest. There were no secrets in battle, no half-truths or hidden motives, only strength, courage, and will. Politics bored him. Feasts, however, did not. Robert drank deeply even as a youth, his tolerance as legendary as his appetite. He loved women just as fiercely, pursuing affection with the same confidence he brought to the training yard. He lived loudly, fully, without hesitation. To Robert, life was something to be seized and enjoyed in the moment, not measured and contemplated. John Arryn saw this clearly. He loved Robert as a son, but he knew his flaws. Still, in Robert he saw something else. Charisma. Men wanted to stand beside him. Soldiers trusted him instinctively. When Robert spoke, people listened. When he laughed, spirits lifted. In a feudal world where loyalty could determine victory or annihilation, this quality mattered more than careful calculation. As the years passed, Robert grew into a towering figure. Broad-shouldered, thick-armed, black-haired and blue-eyed, he looked every inch a warrior lord. He was confident to the point of arrogance, but it rarely turned cruel. Robert was generous with praise, quick to forgive, and quicker still to forget. His anger flared hot, but it burned out just as fast. Ned Stark became his anchor. The two young men were opposites bound by genuine affection. Ned's honour tempered Robert's recklessness. Robert's warmth drew Ned out of his reserve. They spoke often of the future, of returning to their homes, of ruling as their fathers had before them. Robert dreamed of glory. Ned dreamed of peace. It was during these years that Robert became betrothed to Lyanna Stark. He did not truly know her. Few did. Lyanna was wild where Robert imagined softness. She rode horses better than most men, and chafed at the expectations placed upon her. To Robert, she was an ideal, a beautiful northern girl, spirited and strong, destined to stand at his side. He loved the idea of her with absolute certainty. Whether he loved Lyanna herself was another matter entirely. But at the time, none of that seemed important. Robert was young. He was strong. He was heir to Storm's End, foster son of the Lord of the Vale, brother in all but blood to the future Lord of Winterfell. His life stretched before him like an open road. He expected battle, feasting, children, and honour. He expected to grow old and fat in Storm's End, telling stories of his youth to wide-eyed grandchildren. The realm itself seemed stable, at least on the surface. The Targaryens had ruled for nearly 300 years. Dragons were long dead, but the Iron Throne remained unchallenged. King Aerys grew increasingly erratic, yet few believed his madness could shake the foundations of the Seven Kingdoms. Robert did not think about kings. He thought about strength, about glory, about living. Storm clouds gathered regardless. Far away, in King's Landing, Aerys's paranoia deepened. His distrust turned to cruelty, his fear to obsession. He saw enemies everywhere, real or imagined, and in the north, south, and east, the pieces of fate quietly aligned. Robert Baratheon was not born to be a king. He was born to be a warrior. And when the storm finally broke, the realm would learn the difference. Robert Baratheon fell in love with a promise. Lyanna Stark existed in his mind long before she truly existed in his life. She was betrothed to him by alliance and expectation, a union meant to bind the Stormlands and the North. To Robert, that was enough. He imagined her as fierce yet loyal, wild yet destined to be his. In his thoughts, Lyanna was already his future queen, laughing at his side, sharing his victories, softening only for him. The truth was far more complicated. Lyanna Stark was willful, sharp-tongued, and fiercely independent. She rode as well as any knight and bristled at the notion of being owned, even by marriage. She did not share Robert's appetite for excess, nor his casual view of fidelity. Even before the war, she knew him better than he knew her. Lyanna once told her brother Ned that Robert would never be content with one woman, no matter how much he claimed to love her. Robert never heard those words. He loved Lyanna as an ideal, not as a person. To him, love was fire, hot, bright, unquestioned. He did not examine it. He did not doubt it. And when that love was threatened, it became something far more dangerous. The moment that changed everything came at Harrenhal. The great tourney was meant to celebrate peace, but it exposed the fractures beneath the realm. Lords and knights gathered beneath the massive, cursed towers of Harrenhal, the largest castle ever built and long since fallen into ruin. It was here that Prince Rhaegar Targaryen rode crowned in glory, winning the tourney before all eyes. And it was here that he committed a quiet act of defiance. Instead of crowning his wife, Elia of Dawn, Rhaegar placed the Winter Roses, the Queen of Love and Beauty, into Lyanna Stark's lap. The gesture was subtle, but its meaning thundered across the realm. To Robert, it was an insult that burned deeper than steel. Rhaegar had taken something meant for him, publicly, deliberately. The Dragon Prince had humiliated him before lords and small folk alike. Robert's laughter that day rang loud, but it was hollow. Something had been taken, and Robert did not forget slights, nor did he forgive them. Not long after, Lyanna Stark vanished. Whether she was abducted or fled willingly was a question that would haunt the Seven Kingdoms for generations. But to Robert Baratheon, there was never any doubt. Rhaegar Targaryen had stolen her, taken her south, defiled her. The dragon had made himself Robert's enemy in blood and honor alike. Robert's fury was immediate and absolute. He called for war. The realm might still have survived his rage, if not for King Aerys. The Mad King answered the disappearance not with caution, but with madness. When Brandon Stark rode to King's Landing demanding Rhaegar answer for Lyanna, Aerys arrested him. When Rickard Stark followed to plead for his son, Aerys condemned them both. Rickard Stark was burned alive in his armor. Brandon Stark strangled himself trying to reach a sword just out of reach. Their deaths shattered any remaining illusion of peace. Aerys then demanded that Jon Arryn deliver the heads of Robert Baratheon and Eddard Stark, his own foster sons, to the Iron Throne. Jon Arryn refused. That single act of defiance lit the fuse of rebellion. By refusing the king's command, Jon Arryn declared war, not with banners or swords, but with honor. He raised the falcon of the Vale in open defiance of the crown. Robert and Ned, no longer wards but targets, were declared enemies of the state. For Robert Baratheon, there was no turning back. He returned to the Stormlands not as a lord preparing to rule, but as a rebel preparing to fight. The Stormlords answered his call readily. Robert was young, fierce, and wronged. His anger mirrored their own resentment toward a distant, unstable king. Where others hesitated, Robert burned with certainty. This was not politics to him. This was personal. He donned his armor and took up his warhammer with purpose. His fury gave him clarity. Rhaegar had taken Lyanna. Aerys had murdered Ned's family. The Dragon Kings had crossed a line that could only be answered in blood. Ned Stark rallied the North in parallel, marching south beneath the direwolf banner. Houses long bound to Winterfell answered his call without hesitation. In the Riverlands, Hoster Tully joined the rebellion, sealing his allegiance with marriage. His daughters wed to Ned and Jon Arryn. The realm began to split cleanly in two. Robert Baratheon emerged as the face of the rebellion almost by accident. He did not plan to be a symbol. He simply fought, and men followed. His presence on the battlefield was electric. He laughed as he charged, roaring challenges at enemies who broke and fled before his hammer ever fell. Stories spread quickly. Robert the Demon of the Trident, some would later call him, though the Trident still lay ahead. For now, he was Robert the Storm, uncontrolled, unstoppable, and fueled by grief and rage. He slept little, drank heavily, and fought constantly. The war gave him purpose, something he had never lacked before and would never truly find again. Jon Arryn and Ned Stark worried about him. They saw the cracks beneath the fury. Robert spoke of Lyanna often, but always as something lost, never as someone with a will of her own. He did not grieve her absence. He burned at it. His love hardened into obsession, and his hatred of Rhaegar consumed him. Rhaegar became a monster in Robert's telling, a thief, a rapist, a dragon who deserved to be slain. Whether Rhaegar was truly those things mattered less than what Robert needed him to be. The rebellion gathered momentum quickly, but it was far from assured. The crown still commanded vast forces. Loyalist houses raised their banners. The Reach and Dawn remained aligned with the Targaryens. Victory was not inevitable, but Robert Baratheon fought as though it were. He took wounds and ignored them. He laughed through pain that would have felled other men. He drank, fought, and inspired in equal measure. Soldiers spoke of him as if he were already legend, too strong to fall, too furious to be stopped. In quiet moments, when the fires burned low, Robert spoke of the future. He spoke of killing Rhaegar with his own hands. He spoke of taking Lyanna home. He spoke of ending the dragon line forever. No one dared tell him that Lyanna might never return. No one dared question the shape his love had taken. The war fed his certainty, and his certainty fed the war. By the time the banners fully rose across the 7 kingdoms, the conflict was no longer just a rebellion. It was a reckoning. Robert Baratheon had crossed the threshold from lord to war leader, from wronged fiancé to living weapon. The boy who had once laughed through the halls of the Eyrie was gone. In his place stood a man defined by loss, rage, and a singular purpose. The storm had broken, and it would not stop until dragons lay dead in the river, and the realm itself lay changed forever. War did not come to Robert Baratheon slowly. It crashed into his life like a storm surge, sudden and overwhelming, sweeping away the last remnants of youth and illusion. One day he was Lord of Storm's End in name. The next, he was the standard-bearer of open rebellion, hunted by the crown and surrounded by men willing to die in his name. The 7 kingdoms did not yet know it, but the war would come to be defined by him. The early days were chaos. Robert's rebellion did not begin with a single unified host. It began in the fragments, Stormlords rallying to his banner, Northmen marching south under Ned Stark. the Vale rising behind Jon Arryn's falcon. Each force moved independently, vulnerable to loyalist attack. Had the Crown acted decisively, the rebellion might have been crushed before it truly began. Instead, the Mad King hesitated. That hesitation gave Robert time. The first major test came in the Stormlands, where loyalist forces sought to cut Robert off before he could fully gather his strength. The Battle of Summerhall was brutal and confused, fought amid rain-soaked ruins and half-forgotten stones. Robert fought at the centre, his warhammer rising and falling with devastating force. Men died beneath it without ever seeing his face clearly. Only the blur of iron and fury. He was wounded there, struck by an enemy blade. It barely slowed him. Robert fought with a kind of reckless joy that terrified his enemies and thrilled his allies. He laughed as he killed, shouted challenges across the din, and broke formations through sheer momentum. Knights trained in careful technique found themselves crushed by brute force they could not parry. Robert did not duel. He overwhelmed. Word of Summerhall spread quickly. Soon after came Ashford, where Robert faced Randil Tarly of the Reach, one of the most disciplined commanders in Westeros. The Loyalists held firm, and Robert's forces were driven back. It was a defeat, clear, undeniable, and dangerous. For the first time, Robert learned that fury alone would not always be enough. He withdrew, bloodied but alive. The Crown pressed its advantage. John Connington, Hand of the King, and a devoted loyalist, was sent to hunt Robert down and end the rebellion in a single stroke. Connington pursued him relentlessly through the Stormlands, driving him into hiding. Robert was forced to scatter his men, abandoning the open field for survival. He took refuge in the town of Stony Sept. There, wounded and fevered, Robert hid among the small folk, while Connington's men searched house to house. Bells rang through the town as soldiers closed in, their sound echoing like a death sentence. For a moment, it seemed the rebellion might end not in glory, but in a back room, bleeding and alone. The small folk hid him. They smuggled food. They lied. They risked death to protect the man who had fought for them. It was here, more than any battlefield, that Robert proved something essential. People believed in him, not because he was king, but because he was Robert. When Ned Stark and Jon Arryn arrived with relief forces, Connington was crushed between armies. Robert emerged from hiding furious and unstoppable. Despite his wounds, he took the field again immediately, smashing loyalist forces and driving them from the town. Connington was forced to retreat, his failure sealing his disgrace. For Robert, Stony Sept became legend. The moment he refused to die, the moment fate itself seemed to bend around him. The rebellion surged forward. Alliances solidified. The riverlands joined openly, their crossings and roads becoming vital arteries for rebel movement. House Tully bound itself to the cause through marriage, sealing the alliance in blood and oath. The North and Vale were now fully committed. What had begun as defiance was becoming an army. Robert led from the front always. He did not command from tents or rear lines. He fought where the fighting was thickest, where his presence mattered most. Men followed him because he never asked them to do what he would not do himself. When he charged, they charged. When he bled, they bled with him. His reputation grew monstrous. Some said he could not be killed. Others said he was the warrior reborn, sent by the Seven themselves to strike down the Dragon Kings. Robert did nothing to discourage such talk. He embraced the myth, wore it like armor, and let it carry him forward. Yet beneath the legend, cracks formed. Robert's hatred of Rhaegar sharpened with every battle. He spoke of the prince constantly, replaying imagined confrontations, envisioning the blow that would end him. Rhaegar became less a man and more a symbol. Everything Robert had lost, everything stolen from him. Ned Stark saw the danger in this. Where Robert burned hotter, Ned grew colder. He fought with grim determination, but without joy. He saw the cost of war clearly, the burned villages, the dead children, the grief left in its wake. Where Robert spoke of glory, Ned spoke of duty. Their friendship endured, but it strained beneath the weight of war. Jon Arryn worked tirelessly to hold the rebellion together. He negotiated, counseled, and restrained where Robert could not. Without Jon, the rebellion might have fractured under its own fury. Without Robert, it might never have inspired loyalty enough to survive. Together, they formed a dangerous balance, fire and stone, hammer and shield. The Loyalists still held powerful ground. The Reach's armies remained largely intact. Dawn simmered with quiet fury, bound to the Targaryens through Ilia Martell. King's Landing stood untouched behind its walls, the Mad King growing ever more paranoid as the war dragged on. And Rhaegar Targaryen remained absent. The Dragon Prince had vanished early in the war, leaving Loyalist forces to fight without him. His absence gnawed at Robert. Each battle without Rhaegar felt unfinished. Robert did not want victory by attrition. He wanted Rhaegar's blood on his hammer. When Rhaegar finally emerged, leading a royal host north to meet the rebels, Robert's path and his destiny aligned at last. The armies converged toward the Trident. Men whispered that the gods themselves had chosen the river as the place where dragon and stag would meet. The land trembled beneath marching feet. Steel was sharpened. Old songs were sung one last time around campfires. Robert Baratheon prepared for the fight he had imagined for more than a year. He was no longer the laughing youth of the Vale, nor merely a rebel lord. He had become the embodiment of war itself, scarred, furious, and unstoppable. His warhammer, stained and nicked, rested easily in his hands. The rebellion had become his war, and at the Trident it would be decided not by strategy alone, but by the clash of two men who carried the fate of the realm between them. The storm was about to meet the dragon. The Trident ran red before the first blow was struck. Mist clung to the river at dawn, curling low over the shallows, as two great hosts faced one another across its winding course. The land itself seemed to hold its breath. Men stood ankle-deep in cold water, shields raised, banners snapping in a sharp wind that carried the smell of steel and fear. This was no nameless battlefield. This was the heart of the realm, and what happened here would echo for generations. Prince Rhaegar Targaryen had finally come to war. He rode at the head of the royal host, clad in black armor set with rubies that burned like embers in the morning light. His helm bore a dragon's crest, and his demeanor was calm, almost sorrowful. Those who saw him said he looked more like a man marching to a funeral than a battle. He carried himself not with fury, but with grim resolve, as though the outcome were already known. Robert Baratheon waited on the opposite bank. He wore no ornamentation, no jewels or sigils beyond the crowned stag upon his breast. His armor was scarred, battered by months of fighting. In his hands rested his war hammer, heavy, brutal, and utterly without mercy. Where Rhaegar looked like a king from song, Robert looked like war given flesh. When the horn sounded, the river became a killing ground. Men surged forward, splashing through water slick with mud and blood. Shields shattered. Horses screamed and fell. The current carried bodies downstream even as the fighting raged on. The clash was savage and unrelenting, neither side giving ground easily. Robert fought at the center. He smashed through ranks of loyalist soldiers with unstoppable momentum, his hammer rising and falling in wide, devastating arcs. Armor crumpled beneath each blow. Men were thrown aside like broken dolls. His roar carried across the din, a sound of pure fury that drove his men forward and broke the courage of those who faced him. Rhaegar pushed toward him deliberately. The Dragon Prince cut a path through the chaos, his movements precise and controlled. Where Robert overwhelmed, Rhaegar struck with skill, his sword flashing in quick, efficient strokes. The two forces converged inevitably, drawn together by fate, by hatred, and by everything the war had come to represent. They met in the shallows of the river. For a moment, the world narrowed to two men standing knee-deep in running water, surrounded by death. Robert shouted Rhaegar's name, his voice thick with rage. Rhaegar answered nothing. He raised his sword, expression unreadable behind his helm. The duel was brief. Rhaegar struck first, his blade biting into Robert's armor, drawing blood. Robert staggered, pain flaring, but he did not fall. He surged forward with all the force of his weight and fury behind him, swinging his hammer in a brutal arc. The blow landed squarely on Rhaegar's chest. Ruby-studded armor exploded outward, gems scattering like drops of blood across the river. The impact caved in, plate and bone alike. Rhaegar fell backward into the trident, the current pulling at him as the life drained from his body. The dragon was dead. A cry went up from the rebel host, raw, thunderous, triumphant. Loyalist lines wavered, then broke. With Rhaegar slain, the heart of the royal army collapsed. Men threw down their arms or fled, pursued mercilessly across the field. Robert did not celebrate. He stood swaying in the river, blood streaming from his wounds, staring down at the body of the man he had hated for so long. The moment he had dreamed of had come and gone in a heartbeat. There was no satisfaction in it, no triumph. Only exhaustion and a hollow silence where his rage had once lived. He collapsed soon after. Carried from the field by his men, Robert drifted in and out of consciousness as the battle ended around him. Victory had been won, but at a cost. The trident was choked with corpses, the water running dark long after the fighting ceased. The war was effectively over. With Rhaegar dead, the Targaryen cause unravelled, loyalist forces scattered. King's Landing lay exposed, defended by walls but not by hope. The dragon banners that had flown over Westeros for nearly 3 centuries began to fall. As Robert lay wounded, others carried the war to its conclusion. Ned Stark marched south toward the capital. Tywin Lannister, long silent and waiting, brought his armies to the gates of King's Landing, under the pretense of loyalty. The city would soon burn, though Robert would not be there to see it. When Robert finally woke, the news was already spreading. Rhaegar Targaryen was dead, the prince who had stolen Lyanna, the man Robert had blamed for everything that had gone wrong in his life, slain by his own hand in the waters of the Trident. Songs would be written of it. Legends would grow. Children yet unborn would learn the story as truth wrapped in myth. But Robert Baratheon felt no joy. The victory did not bring Lyanna back. It did not heal the wounds in his body or the deeper wounds in his soul. The war had taken something from him that it would never return, even as it offered him a crown. As he lay recovering, word reached him of horrors in King's Landing, the sack, the deaths of Ilia Martell and her children. When he heard, Robert said nothing. Whether from indifference, exhaustion, or something darker, none could say. The moment passed without protest, and in that silence, a shadow settled over his reign before it had even begun. The trident had decided the war. The dragon lay broken, the stag stood victorious, and the realm turned toward a new king forged not in law or lineage, but in blood and storm. Robert Baratheon had won the throne. He did not yet understand what that victory had truly cost. Robert Baratheon did not take the Iron Throne in triumph. He took it wounded, exhausted, and far from the city that would become his seat of power. While he lay recovering from his injuries at the Trident, the war ended without him. The final acts of conquest were carried out by other hands, and the manner in which they were done would haunt his reign from its first breath. King's Landing fell not to Robert, but to treachery. Tywin Lannister, who had held his strength in reserve throughout the rebellion, arrived at the city gates flying the banners of House Lannister. He claimed loyalty to the crown, and the gates were open to him. Once inside, his men turned on the city. The sack of King's Landing was swift and brutal. Streets ran with blood, and the screams of the innocent echoed through the Red Keep. Elia Martell of Dorne was murdered. Her children, Rhaenys and Aegon Targaryen, were slaughtered as well. When Robert later learned of their deaths, his reaction was cold. He did not order the killings, but neither did he punish those responsible. He spoke of dragonspawn, of threats removed, of wars ended decisively. To Ned Stark, who arrived in the city soon after and saw the bodies himself, this was an unforgivable stain. It was the first true rift between them. Robert was crowned king shortly thereafter, though the ceremony itself was restrained, almost perfunctory. The Iron Throne passed to him not through ancient right, but through conquest and the support of the great houses. His Targaryen blood through his grandmother gave him a thin claim, but no one doubted the real reason he ruled. He had won. Yet even as the crown was placed upon his head, Robert seemed ill at ease. The throne was not built for comfort, and neither was he built for sitting. The iron blades bit into his flesh, a fitting symbol for a man who had conquered a kingdom he did not truly want to rule. To secure the realm, Robert married Cersei Lannister. The match was politically perfect and personally disastrous. Cersei was beautiful, proud, and ambitious. She despised Robert from the start. On their wedding night, Robert spoke Lyanna's name in his drunken sleep, and whatever chance the marriage had of peace died then and there. The union produced heirs, or so the realm believed. Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen were presented as Robert's children, but Robert showed them little affection. He did not see himself in Joffrey, and what little interest he took quickly curdled into resentment. The king's disinterest allowed rot to set in unnoticed, hidden behind ceremony and gold. The early years of Robert's reign passed in uneasy calm. The realm was weary of war, and Robert allowed it to rest. He left governance largely to his small council, men like Jon Arryn, who served as hand of the king, and Stannis Baratheon, who was rewarded with Dragonstone for his loyalty and endurance during the siege of Storm's End. Renly was granted Storm's End itself, a decision that would later deepen resentment within his own family. Robert gave generously to those who had supported him. He pardoned many former enemies, preferring laughter and forgiveness to continued bloodshed. In this, he showed a kingly mercy that won him early popularity. Feasts returned, tournaments were held. The realm smiled again, even as cracks formed beneath the surface. But Robert's heart was no longer in it. The man who had lived for battle now found himself surrounded by parchment, petitions, and compromises. He drank more heavily with each passing year. He hunted to escape the court, or to fill the emptiness left by lost purpose. The crown weighed heavier with each dawn. Lyanna Stark was dead. The truth of her fate emerged slowly, and when it did, it shattered the last illusion Robert held dear. She had died in the south, far from home, never to be his queen. Whatever love he had felt curdled into grief and bitterness, and he buried both beneath drink and denial. He never truly mourned her. He idealized her instead, freezing her in memory as something pure and unattainable. The living woman, the one who might have challenged him, disagreed with him, or disappointed him, was replaced by a ghost that could never leave him. The realm paid the price for this absence. Robert's rule drifted. Debts mounted as the crown borrowed heavily to fund feasts and tournaments. Power shifted quietly to men like Peter Baelish, whose clever hands hid ruin behind numbers. Robert did not notice. He did not care. He had won the throne to avenge a stolen love and end a dynasty. He had never learned how to keep a kingdom. The Iron Throne did not change Robert Baratheon. It revealed him, a great warrior, unmatched in his fury and strength, but unsuited to the slow, grinding labor of rule. The storm that had shattered dragons now lashed outward, uncontrolled and unfocused, eroding the foundations of the realm it had claimed. Robert Baratheon was king, and the war that had made him had already begun to destroy him from within. The war ended, but Robert Baratheon never truly returned from it. In the years that followed his coronation, the man who had once shattered armies with a hammer began to fade into memory, replaced by a king who ruled in name but not in spirit. The strength remained for a time, but it softened. The fire that had driven him burned lower each year, buried beneath wine, excess, and a growing indifference to the crown he wore. Robert hated ruling. The Iron Throne was a cage, its blades cold and unforgiving, its duties endless and dull. He had imagined kingship as a reward for victory, not as a life sentence of council meetings and compromises. Where once he had lived for the clarity of battle, he now faced a world of debts, feuds, and quiet corruption that could not be smashed apart with a warhammer. So he fled from it. Robert drank as if trying to drown memory itself. Cups were always within reach, refilled before they were empty. Wine numbed the ache of loss, Lyanna, youth, purpose, but it also dulled his mind. He laughed less easily, and when he laughed, it was often loud and hollow, meant to convince himself as much as others. He hunted to feel alive again. In the Kingswood, chasing boar and deer, Robert could pretend he was still the man he had been. The thrill of the chase, the moment of impact, the rush of blood, these things reminded him of war. But each hunt ended the same way, with a carcass and an emptiness that refused to be filled. His body changed. The warrior's frame thickened into softness, The armour that had once fit him perfectly was set aside for looser mail and leather. His reflexes slowed. Old wounds ached in the cold. The hammer that had been an extension of his will gathered dust, replaced by goblets and knives. Cersei Lannister watched all of this with quiet contempt. Their marriage had never been a partnership. It was a truce, brittle and poisoned. Robert resented her for not being Lyanna, and Cersei despised him for his drunkenness, his infidelities, and his refusal to be controlled. They shared a bed rarely, and when they did, it was joyless. Each retreated into their own schemes and silences. Robert sought comfort elsewhere. He fathered countless bastards across the 7 kingdoms, living reminders of his appetite and neglect. He felt a rough affection for them, but never the discipline or responsibility to bring them into his life. They existed on the edges of his kingdom, unnoticed and unprotected, much like the realm itself. The children he claimed as his own were strangers. Joffrey frightened him. From the boy's earliest years, Robert sensed something wrong. Cruelty without conscience, pride without restraint. Once, in a rare moment of anger, Robert struck him. Cersei never forgave him for it. After that, Robert withdrew entirely, choosing absence over confrontation. Myrcella and Tommen fared little better, though Robert felt less animosity toward them. Still, he was a distant father at best, a ghost in his own household. While Robert escaped into excess, others ruled in his stead. Jon Arryn laboured tirelessly as Hand of the King, holding the realm together through patience and compromise. He settled disputes, managed alliances, and restrained the worst impulses of the court. Stannis Baratheon served dutifully but bitterly, carrying the burden of Dragonstone and the fleet without thanks or affection from his brother. Renly flourished where Robert faded. Handsome, charming, and beloved by the court, Renly embodied the King Robert once had been, minus the war. His popularity stung Robert more than he admitted. In Renly, he saw the version of himself the realm preferred now. Youthful, effortless, unscarred by blood. The crown's debts mounted. Peter Baelish smiled and reassured the king that everything was under control, while quietly entangling the realm in obligations that would one day strangle it. Robert signed decrees without reading them, waved away concerns with a laugh, and returned to his cups. The realm grew complacent. Peace settled over Westeros like a false dawn. Beneath it, resentments festered. Dawn remembered Elia. The Reach watched and waited. Across the narrow sea, the last Targaryens lived in exile, their names spoken only in whispers, except by Robert, who could never let go of his hatred. He spoke of dragons often, of killing them, of finishing what he had started. Even in peace, Robert remained at war with ghosts. The idea of Daenerys Targaryen, the last dragon, living somewhere beyond his reach, gnawed at him. He could not rest while any reminder of Rhaegar remained alive. In quieter moments, Robert admitted the truth to himself. He missed the war, not the death or the loss, but the certainty. In battle, the enemy was clear, the goal simple. In peace, everything blurred. There were no clean victories, only compromises and slow decay. Robert Baratheon had been made for conflict. Without it, he unravelled. By the time the story opens in earnest, the king is already a relic, alive, powerful, and utterly adrift. The stag still sits the Iron Throne, but the storm that once defined him has passed, leaving behind only the wreckage. The king who had conquered a realm had stopped fighting. And in that surrender, the seeds of a far greater war were quietly taking root. When Robert Baratheon rode north to Winterfell, it was not a king returning to an old friend. It was a tired man reaching backward in time, grasping for a version of himself that no longer existed. The long journey from King's Landing to the cold stone halls of Winterfell was filled with laughter and drink, but beneath it lay desperation. Jon Arryn was dead, poisoned by truths he had uncovered, and Robert suddenly found himself without the one man who had held his kingdom together. He needed Ned Stark. From the moment Robert saw him again, he was reminded of everything he was not. Ned was unchanged, stern, lean, honourable to a fault. The years had not softened him or turned him aside. Where Robert had surrendered to comfort, Ned had endured. Their reunion was warm, genuine, and heavy with unspoken grief. Robert asked Ned to become Hand of the King. He framed it as friendship, as duty, as necessity. In truth, it was fear. Robert knew he was failing. He knew the realm was rotting, even if he refused to look directly at it. Ned represented order, clarity, and restraint, the very things Robert had abandoned. Ned accepted reluctantly. In King's Landing, the court greeted Ned with smiles sharpened like knives. He saw immediately how far the city had fallen since the war. The small council was a nest of ambition and manipulation. Petyr Baelish whispered and smiled. Varys watched silently. Cersei ruled the Red Keep in all but name. Robert watched it all from a distance. He attended feasts, hunted, drank, and avoided the council whenever possible. When Ned tried to involve him in matters of governance, Robert waved them away. He trusted Ned to handle the unpleasant details. That trust was both a gift and a burden. The past refused to stay buried. When word reached King's Landing that Daenerys Targaryen had married Khal Drogo, Robert's fury reignited. The idea of Dragonblood gaining power again filled him with blind rage. He demanded her death without hesitation. To Robert, mercy toward Targaryens was weakness. He could not separate justice from vengeance where dragons were concerned. Ned refused. The argument between them was fierce and bitter, the deepest rift their friendship had ever known. Ned spoke of innocence, of children not yet born. Robert spoke of war, of preventing the past from rising again. Neither could move the other. Ned resigned as Hand of the King. In the aftermath, Robert was left alone with his choices. He raged, drank, and hunted, but the certainty that had once defined him was gone. For the first time, Robert Baratheon doubted himself and hated the feeling. Meanwhile, Ned continued his investigation. He read ledgers and lineages, followed whispers and secrets, and uncovered a truth that threatened the very foundation of Robert's reign. The royal children were not Robert's at all. They were the product of incest, born of Cersei and Jaime Lannister. It was the ultimate betrayal. Robert never learned the truth. Before Ned could confront him, Robert rode out on a final hunt. He drank heavily, ignoring warnings, chasing the thrill one last time. The boar he faced was massive and enraged. Driven to fury by dogs and horns, the king was gored. As Robert lay dying, the storm within him finally stilled. Pain stripped away pretense, and clarity came at last. He spoke to Ned with honesty he had avoided for years, of regrets, of failures, of a life that had slipped through his fingers. He signed his will, naming Ned as protector of the realm until his son came of age. Even then, Robert chose ignorance. He did not ask hard questions. He did not demand truth. Some part of him knew that to look fully at his kingdom was to admit he had lost control of it long ago. Robert Baratheon died as he had lived, loud, wounded, and haunted by ghosts. Ned Stark stood vigil as the life left him, knowing that with the king's final breath, the fragile peace of the realm had ended. The truth Robert had avoided would now tear the seven kingdoms apart. The storm was gone. What followed would be far worse. Robert Baratheon died as the realm slept, unaware that the peace he had taken for granted was already finished. The wound from the boar festered quickly. What should have been survivable became fatal, worsened by drink and neglect. The king, who had once shrugged off battlefield injuries, now lay helpless, his massive body broken by a single moment of carelessness. In the Red Keep, whispers spread through corridors thick with incense and fear. Power was already shifting, even before Robert drew his final breath. In his last hours, Robert was painfully lucid. The wine was gone. The laughter was gone. What remained was a man forced to confront the truth of his life without the armor of excess. He spoke openly to Ned Stark, of regret, of Lyanna, of how badly he had failed the realm. He admitted that he had never wanted to be king, only the victory that came with it. "I was never meant to sit the Iron Throne," he confessed. It was the closest Robert Baratheon ever came to understanding himself. He spoke of his brothers with a mix of guilt and dismissal. Stannis, dutiful and unloved, had been pushed aside despite his loyalty. Renly, charming and beloved, had been indulged and elevated without thought for consequence. Robert had ruled his family the same way he ruled the realm, by instinct, not care. When the time came, he dictated his will. He named Eddard Stark protector of the realm, trusting his oldest friend to guard the kingdom until Joffrey came of age. Even here, Robert chose comfort over truth. He did not question the parentage of his children. He did not ask Ned what he feared to say. Robert preferred the illusion of order to the chaos that truth would bring. That decision doomed the Seven Kingdoms. Robert Baratheon died shortly after, his crown set aside, his warhammer silent. The man who had shattered a dynasty passed from the world not in battle, but in a bed surrounded by courtiers already calculating their next move. The moment he died, the war began. Cersei Lannister acted immediately. Robert's will was altered, Ned was arrested, and the Iron Throne passed to Joffrey Baratheon, cruel, unstable, and utterly unfit to rule. The boy king inherited not only a crown, but all the consequences of Robert's neglect. Ned Stark was executed. With that single act, the realm erupted. The North rose in rebellion under Robb Stark. Stannis Baratheon declared himself the true king, armed with the law and the truth Robert had ignored. Renly Baratheon claimed the crown through popularity and alliance, embodying everything Robert had been loved for and none of what he had learned. The War of the Five Kings consumed Westeros. Robert Baratheon had united the realm through violence and held it together through neglect. Once he was gone, there was nothing left to bind it. The alliances he had taken for granted shattered. Old grievances resurfaced. New horrors followed. And yet, Robert's legacy endured. To the small folk, he remained the king who laughed, who feasted, who made the realm feel alive again after the terror of Aerys. To the lords, he was the warrior who broke the dragon and won the throne by right of strength. To his enemies, he was careless, brutal, and blind. To history, he was a paradox. A great man who was a poor king, a conqueror who could not rule. a storm that shattered everything in its path and left only silence in its wake. Robert Baratheon did not fail because he was cruel. He failed because he stopped fighting, not on the battlefield, but for the realm itself. When the crown fell from his brow, it revealed the truth he had avoided his entire life. Winning a kingdom is easy compared to keeping one whole. The storm had passed. What followed was ruin,